Hello everyone and welcome to This Is a Vlog. One of two December specials, kind of. It was originally going to be one, but something obviously happened yesterday that I kind of wanted to talk about and clear up a few things, because it seems that certain things are not being completely understood in terms of the whole passing of Nelson Mandela. Um, and I wanted to make this particular vlog very quickly to pick apart one particular argument that has been going around social media. Basically, some people have been going around Facebook and Twitter with the notion that we shouldn't respect Nelson Mandela on the basis that he was a terrorist. Obviously, poor taste after what happened. And that's the argument I want to pick apart because it goes slightly deeper than that. First of all, I want to clear up the meaning of the word terrorist, because the meaning of the word has definitely changed over the past 2 decades, and I think it's better to clear that up before we move on with the rest of the argument. The word terrorist is actually an umbrella term for many different things these days, and it's just easier to say, oh, that person's a terrorist. But the word has kind of been contorted over the years, and I think that what's happened, especially in the case of Mandela, is that people have seen or read certain things and have misinterpreted the view. What I'm trying to say is that the word terrorist meant something different back in the 1960s than to what it does now. When people hear the word terrorist these days, you conjure up the image of something like 9/11 or 7/7, or if your minds are as fresh as mine, Norway and Boston. Um, but and these are events where the people who committed them have gone out of their way to kill people. They've gone out of their way to kill people, to cause chaos for a political aim. And that has very much become the epitome of terrorism, the definition of terrorism. But that wasn't the same back in the 1960s. Terrorism was a whole different thing back then. And because of the event of this in this century, people have this overall idea that terrorism is somebody who's out to kill people, someone who's out to cause chaos, someone who will target particular buildings or locations to make a point. But that's the modern view of terrorism. And today's terrorists are people like Osama bin Laden, Anders Breivik, Djokovic Zanayev. They are terrorists in the modern context. You cannot attribute this form of terrorism to Nelson Mandela, because the fact of the matter is, Mandela was a terrorist, but he was not a terrorist in the same way that bin Laden, Zanayev, and Breivik were. He was something else entirely. You can't put those people in the same group together, because Mandela's form of terrorism was radically different to that of the aforementioned three. The reason Mandela is a terrorist, hear me out, he's a terrorist because the South African apartheid authorities named him so. But in reality, he was a freedom fighter, which is... The two names can go hand in hand. If you look up the official definition of terrorist, one of the subdivisions will be freedom fighter. But he was only called a terrorist because the South African authorities called him that themselves. And while people like Osama bin Laden go out of their way to hurt people or to kill people, Mandela made sure that when he made plans to mark a location, he tried to make sure that there was no one about at the time of the attack. And he didn't target government buildings, he didn't target massive skyscrapers, he targeted small locations like power lines, empty post offices, those sorts of things. Places that weren't of global significance, but were integral to the white South African way of life. To try and picture it in your mind, imagine myself going to, let's say, the Royal British Legion Hall in Shaftesbury and setting it alight. That's kind of the sort of thing we're dealing with here. We're not dealing with Mandela getting in a plane, flying it into a building. We're getting with locations that are used by the white South African authorities but empty, so no one could get hurt. And he was very, very careful to make sure that no one got hurt. That's the defining thing here. He didn't want anyone injured or killed by his actions. And move the terrorism label aside for a moment. There's something that I feel that these people who describe him as a terrorist and say we shouldn't respect him are missing. And that point is that he spent 27 years in the harshest prison the apartheid authorities could put him in. He survived the 27 years, more or less. He had health issues. But not once in that 27 years did he renounce his cause. And his ideas remained the same. His political view didn't change, despite Robben Island being a ferociously brutal place. In the mid to late 1980s, Mandela was given the opportunity to walk free from Robben Island on the condition that he renounced the use of violence in the anti-apartheid movement and the movement itself. And Mandela refused. He would rather have stayed in prison than renounce the movement altogether. And that is brilliant, because I don't think there are many people in the world that could handle that or could make that decision on their own accord. So to sum up, Mandela wasn't Superman. He did have his faults, but he wasn't a terrorist that some people are claiming. And the reason I think they are claiming that is because they've seen that the South African authorities called him a terrorist and have misinterpreted the use of the word to put it in a modern context. But if he was a terrorist in the modern context, none of us would be sad that he was dead. But he wasn't. He was the complete opposite. He was a wonderful man who did what he had to do under difficult circumstances. And that's something I think that these people who are calling him a terrorist seem to not be able to understand. And it's sad that people think this, but then there were always going to be a few, weren't there? So yeah, that's my fanboyish moment over Nelson Mandela. Till the next time, goodbye.